Hello. It is with excitement that I share this with you. This is a bigger psychometric idea that really so far only my closest friends and confidants have heard about. It has taken some time. The big intuitive truths have been there for a long time. Specific terminology has come a little more difficult. I believe that psychometrically humans are naturally tribal, that we're not getting more global, we're not getting more harmonious, that we are essentially tribal, that all culture is warlike and territorial, all culture has defined tribal rules and roles, and all culture sorts you into threat or non-threat categories. Define tribal roles is going to be a specific video. All culture being warlike and territorial. Now, you may be able to think that you look back on history and see maybe people getting little less violent, a little less territorial. It's been some time since the last World War. But I present to you that what changes is the war and the territory. That is, we went from the last global war into a Cold War, and then into financial war and technological war. And what changes is territory. After those land wars came a war for the hearts and minds of people. Um, we're now being presented the idea that space is going to be a legitimate battlefield. The internet is a legitimate battlefield. There are battlefields that have not yet been presented to us because as parts of humanity try to clamp down on our naturally warlike and territorial natures, it will merely find other ways to express itself. Examples of this desire to put a clamp on this natural warlike humanity being thwarted by an underlying nature include Plato's book The Republic says that democracy leads inevitably to tyranny. Well, on paper, it's a really good idea that everybody talks and we have solutions that work for the largest amount of people and that communities share. That seems to be something that works on a very small scale and breaks down on a larger scale because of problems like bureaucracy and problems like multiculturalism. Cultures, which I believe are inherently warlike and territorial, will not blend, they will fight. Um, So the reason that it leads inevitably to tyranny is that it leaves its doors open to those who can be democratically elected to the will of the masses. World War I and World War II give us an example of this very thing. At the end of World War I, the League of Nations placed a bunch of punishments, let's say, upon Germany. And among them were, despite the fact that you see yourselves as a warring, territorial kingdom, we're going to forcibly democratize you and make you into a new country that functions democratically so you can play well with others. And so, the man who caused World War II and was at the earthly center point of its destruction was democratically elected because of a political system placed there by those who thought that the warlike nature of mankind could be altered by changing a political system. Finally, many empires globally have existed with buffer zones. That is, you have your center and your exterior, and the buffer zones are what gets shot at when somebody attacks you. And then buffer zones will say that this is unfair and unjust and will break away because we think it's really inhumane and not right. And they then become, and you can think of any example you want to, I'm not going to name countries. When they become a superpower themselves, they get their own buffer zones that are complaining about the need for those things. All of which is because humans are warlike and territorial, and it is not that those in power are inherently more immoral than those underneath. It is that all humans in groups desire to be warlike and territorial. All culture will sort you into threat and non-threat categories. And by culture, I mean workplace, or church, or subculture, or family. Honestly, whether it's a country or not, these things will apply. There are two kinds of threats, short-term and long-term. A short-term threat is a trespasser. They will use maximum non-didactic force to eliminate that trespasser. By non-didactic, I mean they will not explain anything about what they're doing. It will come from the self-justified hierarchy. This is how things are. People like you don't belong here. Because it is looking for its own DNA being throughout its own cultural cellular structure. The point will be to expel them or neutralize them. And when they're neutralized, they're no longer a threat. And ideally become part of that organism. To expel, they will use verbal or social means, or they will censure them. That is, making it impossible for them to speak forward because you do not want the outsider to have anything to say within your culture. To neutralize means you make them into something non-threatening. And that person then becomes a memory, an invader, or a member. So, a long-term threat is an invader. That is someone who has emerged in your culture, is refusing to leave, and is not obeying its cultural rules, and therefore is a threat to the desire of that culture to be reinforcing the sense this territory is theirs, and it belongs to the culture. No threat is neutral. This threat is either going to conquer or be conquered. Thus, it is going to come in and change the organism, the culture, which the culture cannot have. The culture will fight against it because it is warlike and territorial. The person could be made into a member. The person could be scared away. So if they're conquered, they become a member. If they're scared away, they become a memory. And if they conquer, they're going to change the culture because cultures do not, sorry, you kill the culture and you create a new one because that new thing is a different culture. It's not a modification of the old one. Just as while the Roman Empire was built on the ashes of the Greek Empire, it's a new thing that took pieces and rebuilt a new thing. It never called itself Greece 2.0. It was the Roman Empire, regardless of elements it took from other places. Now, as we referred to before, the means of war changes. That is this warfare. It used to happen historically with spears or poison. You will see it happening through acts of conformity or non-conformity. That is, we see you not conforming to the culture. We're going to show you what conformity looks like and measure your conformity. Speech will be used to model how things should be thought about and talked about within the culture, and the person that speaks differently will be censured. Correct behavior in that culture will be modeled, and the person that seems to be invading will be anti-modeling, either on purpose or because they're not part of the culture, will be presenting an anti-model of the approved cultural behavior to the great sense of disdain of the culture. That is, that anti-modeling is perceived psychologically as an act of war. Very rarely is violence involved, but it is involved, and very rarely is money involved. That is, loss of opportunities to generate money in a situation where money is involved, not based on measurable things about performance, but that sense that this person really just isn't wanted this thing. Short-term non-threat is a visitor. Short-term means they left. They'll be spoken of with disappointment because culture is never questioned. The self-justifying hierarchy is never questioned. People that leave can only be talked about in two categories. One, heroes or traitors. Heroes boldly left to expand culture. They've been transferred. They've been relocated. They're still a part of this thing. But when they leave, they are traitors. They are spoken of as fearful people, as those who abandon something important. Finally, the long-term non-threat is a member. And that person will be constantly reminded of what the expectations of the culture are. Those actions of warfare involving conformity, speech, modeling, language, and other devices will be used to continually smooth off rough cultural edges and remind that person how they should be behaving until they're an exemplary example of the DNA or cultural values of this subculture. There will be a constant sense that you're on the lookout for imperfections in that person, and that person has got to really not mind being constantly reminded of what is expected of them within their culture. There is a lot more about this topic, but that's a really good start on this subject. Thank you very much. I hope that I've blessed, encouraged you, and enhanced your mental understanding of psychometrics and human interaction in groups. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe, and have a wonderful